The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It was the kind of rain that made everything feel heavier. The sky, the streets, even your thoughts. Michael sat on a cracked bench at a lonely bus stop, his bag beside him, soaked through. He had walked out of his apartment earlier that day after receiving a final notice for rent. The landlord had been kind for 2 months, but kindness had limits. Now, with no job, no savings, and nowhere to go, Michael watched cars splash through puddles, each one a reminder of how far he'd fallen. He hadn't eaten since the previous morning. His stomach growled, but hunger had long stopped being his biggest problem. "God," he whispered, his voice barely audible under the rain. "If you're still up there, I need a sign. Just one, because I'm tired." He didn't expect an answer. But sometimes the universe listens when a man reaches his breaking point. A black SUV pulled up by the bus stop, wipers slashing at the windshield. The tinted window rolled down halfway, revealing an older man with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "You'll catch a fever sitting out there," the man said. His voice was deep, calm, the kind that carried quiet authority. Michael blinked. "I'm fine," he muttered. "No, you're not," the man said simply. "Get in. You look like you've lost everything." Michael hesitated. In Lagos, kindness from strangers was often a mask. But something in the man's tone disarmed him, not pity but certainty. He opened the door and got in. The car smelled of leather and sandalwood. Soft jazz played through the speakers. The driver, a middle-aged man in a suit, glanced at him but said nothing. The older man studied Michael for a few seconds. "Name?" "Michael," he said quietly. "Last name?" "Adigan." The man nodded. "You worked at James and Company, didn't you?" Michael stiffened. "How do you know that?" The man smiled faintly. "I used to do business with them." "Heard about the incident? The one that got you fired. You were the one who created that logistics model, weren't you?" Michael's eyes widened. "Yes, but it wasn't finished when your boss stole the credit. The man finished for him." Michael's chest tightened. "Something like that." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I thought so. You have potential, Michael. You just don't know how to use it yet." Michael frowned. "Who are you?" The man extended his hand. "Mr. Gideon, entrepreneur, investor. I run Nova Solutions." The name hit him like a bell. Nova Solutions was one of the fastest-growing logistics startups in Nigeria, a company he'd once dreamed of working for. Michael shook his hand slowly. "You're wondering why I stopped for you," Gideon said, reading his thoughts. "Simple. I've been where you are." Michael looked at him skeptically. Gideon chuckled. "Oh, don't let the suit fool you. 20 years ago, I was sleeping under the Ojalegba Bridge, eating biscuits for dinner. My wife left me because I couldn't provide. Everyone said I was done. But failure teaches faster than any university." Michael's throat tightened. "Let me guess," Gideon continued. "A woman left you too." Michael turned his face to the window, the rain hiding his expression. "My wife, my best friend, my job, all gone." Gideon's tone softened. "Good. That means you've got nothing left to lose. That's the best place to start." Michael turned to him slowly. "Start what?" "Building," Gideon said. "You've got a mind for systems. I can tell. The question is, are you ready to learn from scratch? No salary, no comfort, no shortcuts." Michael hesitated. "What would I be doing?" "Learning business from the ground up," Gideon said. "Not as my employee, as my student. I'll give you a place to stay and enough food to survive. But you'll earn everything else. Every naira, every lesson." Michael stared at him. He wanted to believe it, but life had taught him that offers too good to be true usually were. "Why me?" he asked finally. Gideon smiled. "Because I saw the fire in your eyes when I mentioned your boss stealing your work. That kind of anger, when controlled, builds empires." Silence filled the car. The rain softened. Michael nodded slowly. "When do I start?" Gideon leaned back, satisfied. "You just did." The following weeks were brutal. Gideon wasn't a gentle teacher. He believed in pain as a form of discipline. Michael swept warehouses, carried crates, and worked 16-hour shifts for almost nothing. When he wasn't working, he was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Lean Startup, Atomic Habits, and any finance book Gideon threw his way. He learned how money flowed, how to spot opportunity where others saw chaos, how business wasn't just about products, but systems, networks, timing, psychology. There were nights he wanted to quit, nights he collapsed on the small mattress in Gideon's compound, too tired to think. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Linda and Daniel laughing. He heard his father's voice calling him a disgrace. That pain became his fuel. 3 months passed. Then 6. One evening, Gideon called him into his office. "You've done well," he said, sipping coffee. "Tell me, Michael, what do you want most right now?" Michael thought for a moment. "Freedom," he said. Gideon raised an eyebrow. "Freedom from what?" "From needing anyone to believe in me before I can rise." Gideon smiled slowly. "Good answer." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a brown envelope. "Take this." Michael opened it. Inside was a check, 5 million Nigerian nairas. His breath caught. "What? Sir, I can't." "It's not a gift," Gideon interrupted. "It's seed money. Start your own thing. I'll mentor you, but you'll handle everything else." Michael stared at the check like it was magic. "You said you wanted freedom." Gideon said, "Now earn it." For the first time in years, Michael felt alive. He didn't rush. He studied, planned, built quietly. He noticed a gap in the logistics industry. Small businesses struggling with affordable, reliable delivery options. He started SwiftPath Logistics from a single laptop and an old phone. He recruited 2 delivery riders, borrowed a friend's spare office, and began handling small deliveries for local vendors. The first month, he made nothing. The second month, a little more. By the third, word of mouth started spreading. Then came a viral moment. A tweet from a local influencer praising SwiftPath's reliability. Overnight, the business exploded. Orders tripled. Vendors lined up. Investors called. And for the first time since his downfall, Michael smiled without bitterness. He had built something. Something real. And this time, no one could take it away. By the end of the year, SwiftPath had expanded into 3 cities. One evening, as Michael sat in his office overlooking the city lights, Gideon visited. "Looks like you're finally standing tall," Gideon said. Michael chuckled. "Trying to." Gideon studied him for a moment. "You've done more than try. You've earned your crown. But don't forget where you came from." Michael nodded. "Never." As Gideon left, Michael turned back to window, a small smile playing on his lips. He wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The hum of Lagos never really sleeps. It breathes, in horns and footsteps, in the steady roar of ambition that rises with the sun. For Michael Adigun, that hum had become music. Every honk, every shout, every engine rumble, all of it reminded him that life was moving again, and this time, he was the one driving. It had been 6 months since the viral tweet that changed everything. SwiftPath Logistics had grown from a struggling startup to a company people were beginning to notice. His riders wore branded blue jackets now. His office had expanded to 2 floors, and he had a small but hungry team. Michael had become a man obsessed with growth. He worked 16-hour days, read during lunch breaks, and never went to sleep without checking the day's performance chart. His phone buzzed constantly, clients, partners, invoices, vendors, but he didn't complain. Because for the first time in years, the buzz meant he was needed. He wasn't the man waiting for pity anymore. He was the man people waited on. That Monday morning began like any other. The air was thick with the smell of rain and diesel. Michael was in his office, sipping cheap coffee as he reviewed the latest delivery reports. His operations manager, Femi, a tall, sharp young man with dreadlocks and a permanent grin, knocked and entered. "Boss, we just signed a deal with AO Stores." Michael looked up, eyebrows raised. "The supermarket chain?" Femi grinned wider. "Yes, boss. 6 branches. Weekly contracts." Michael leaned back in his chair, a slow smile creeping across his face. He had pitched that deal 2 months ago, and they'd laugh him off, saying they couldn't risk logistics with small players. Now, they were calling him. He chuckled softly. Send them the contract. We'll start tomorrow. Yes, boss. As Femi left, Michael swiveled his chair toward the window. Rain had begun to drizzle again, painting soft lines down the glass. He remembered another rainy day, sitting at that bus stop, broken, drenched, and invisible. He smiled bitterly. If only Linda could see this, he murmured. But she couldn't. And even if she did, he didn't care to know. At least, that's what he told himself. By evening, he was exhausted. He turned off the lights in his office, slung his jacket over his shoulder, and stepped outside. The city was alive. Yellow buses shouting, street hawkers running between cars, the smell of roasted corn mixing with rain and smoke. He bought a stick of suya from a roadside vendor and leaned against his car, eating quietly. That's when his phone rang. A known number. He almost ignored it, but picked up anyway. Hello? Michael, a female voice said. The sound froze him. It was faint, uncertain, but unmistakable. Linda? There was silence on the other end. Then a small sigh. It's been a long time. Michael's throat tightened. Yes, a very long time. I heard about SwiftPath, she said quickly, her tone soft but cautious. I saw an article online. You're doing well. He said nothing. He could hear her breathing, slow and nervous. I want to congratulate you, she continued. I'm happy for you. Michael laughed quietly, not bitterly this time, just with a kind of tired disbelief. You're happy for me? Yes. You left me when I had nothing, when I was at my lowest. You told me I was dragging you down. You even said I was too ordinary for your future. And now you're happy for me? Linda's voice cracked. I didn't mean it that way. You did. Michael cut in sharply. And I believed you. That's what hurt the most. Silence. Michael, please, she whispered. I just want to talk. Can we meet? He stared out at the street, rain glistening under streetlights. Why now, Linda? Why after all this time? There was a faint tremor in her voice. Because I made a mistake. He closed his eyes. He didn't need to ask what kind. He'd heard rumors. Daniel's company collapsing, the debts, the fights. Michael took a long breath. I hope you find peace, Linda. Please, Michael. But he hung up. The rain began again, heavier this time, and Michael let it soak him for a moment before entering his car. His reflection in the mirror looked different now. Colder, steadier. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled him. It had become fuel. 3 weeks later, SwiftPath officially crossed 100 million Nigerian nairas in revenue. Gideon came to visit that day, the first time in months. He walked into Michael's new office wearing his usual calm smile and expensive linen suit. I see you've been busy, he said, glancing around. Michael grinned. You taught me well. Gideon sat down. No, I just gave you a reason to start moving. You did the rest. They talked for an hour about system scale, expansion, and competition. Then Gideon leaned forward. There's something I want you to think about, Michael, he said. You're doing well, but success is like a sharp knife. It can feed you or cut you. Which one it becomes depends on how you hold it. Michael nodded. I understand. Gideon studied him silently. Do you? Michael smiled faintly. Maybe not yet, but I'm learning. Gideon chuckled. Good, because I have a new opportunity for you. But this one isn't about logistics. It's about vision. He opened his briefcase and handed Michael a tablet showing a proposal. Novago, a tech-driven delivery app designed to revolutionize African logistics. I want a partner, not an employee, Gideon said. You in? Michael stared at the screen. His pulse quickened. This was big, bigger than anything he'd ever imagined. I'm in, he said finally. Gideon smiled. Then welcome to the table. Partnership changed everything. Over the next year, Novago exploded. It combined Gideon's reputation and Michael's street-smart innovation into a company that dominated delivery across Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. By their second year, investors had come calling. By the third, Michael's face appeared in magazines, and his name trended online. The man who rose from nothing. The rain-soaked dreamer turned logistics king. And still, he remained hungry. Each new milestone brought him a rush, not just of pride, but of something deeper, power. He began dressing differently. Tailored suits, sleek watches, calm confidence in every step. The same people who once mocked him now called him sir. Even his father, who once called him useless, had begun boasting to neighbors about his brilliant son. But not everyone clapped for him, because success doesn't erase enemies. It multiplies them. One afternoon, while signing a new partnership deal, his assistant walked in nervously. "Sir, there's a man here asking to see you. He says he's Daniel." Michael froze mid-signature. For a long second, he said nothing. Then calmly, "Send him in." Daniel walked in, thinner, older, his confidence long gone. His once expensive suit looked worn. His eyes darted around nervously. "Michael," he said quietly, almost respectfully, "it's been a while." Michael leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "It has." Daniel forced a smile. "You look good. You've done well for yourself." Michael's tone was calm, almost attached. "You didn't come here to compliment me. What do you want?" Daniel swallowed. "I need help. My business collapsed. Investors pulled out. I'm in debt." Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "You stole my wife, Daniel. My life fell apart because of you." Daniel's eyes lowered. "I know, and I regret it every day. But please, I just need a chance. A small contract. Anything." For a moment, Michael said nothing. Then he stood up and walked to a window. The skyline stretched before him, tall, gleaming, endless. "You remember when you said I'd never make it?" Michael said softly, "You said I wasn't built for this world, that I didn't have the guts to win." Daniel looked down, shame in his eyes. "I was wrong." "Yes," Michael said, turning slowly. "You were?" He walked back to his desk, picked up a folder, and handed it to him. "Here's a deal. A logistics contract. Short term. It'll help you get back on your feet." Daniel's eyes lit up. "Thank you, Michael. I won't forget this." Michael's tone stayed cool. "You shouldn't, because this isn't kindness, Daniel. It's clarity. I want you to work under me. The man you once thought was beneath you." Daniel froze. "You'll report to my junior manager. Every invoice, every request goes through him. If you can swallow your pride and do the job, you'll earn your redemption." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I understand." Michael watched him leave, his heart strangely calm. He didn't need to humiliate him. Life already had. And for the first time, Michael realized something powerful. Revenge didn't always require rage. Sometimes it only needed success. Later that night, Michael stood by his balcony overlooking the city lights. He thought of everything: the rain, the betrayal, the pain, the hunger. And somewhere deep inside, a peace began to grow. He wasn't just proving anyone wrong anymore. He was becoming someone right, someone whole. That night, he opened his phone and saw a message from Gideon. "When the storm is over, build a house where it rained. Kings are made from broken weather." Michael smiled. He had weathered his storm. And now, the crown finally fit. Success had a sound. For Michael, it was a low hum of air conditioners in his office tower, the quiet clicking of high heels on marble floors, and the muted buzz of phones as his staff handled deals worth millions. Every morning, when he entered the building, people straightened, greeted him with respect, and moved out of his way. He didn't crave it, but he'd earned it. And yet, sometimes in the quiet hours between dusk and midnight, he felt the walls closing in, the meetings, the phone calls, the applause. None of it filled the space that loneliness carved out inside him. He'd gotten used to silence. But silence was different from peace. It was a Thursday evening when the city finally paused for him. Michael had just finished a long investor meeting and told his driver to take the night off. He wanted to drive himself, just to feel the city again. He turned off the AC, rolled down the window, and let Legos touch him. The smell of roasted corn, the chatter of street vendors, the chaos of life moving without apology. He stopped at a small roadside buka he used to visit years ago, the kind of place where the chairs were plastic and the food came with a smile that didn't care about your wallet. Brothers. Long time, the owner, Mama Nkechi, shouted, recognizing him immediately. You still day alive? Michael chuckled. Barely, Mama. She laughed, slapping his shoulder affectionately. You come eat a bacha, or you want to show us for TV? A bacha, with fried fish, he said, smiling genuinely. He sat down under the dim light bulb, feeling more alive in that noisy corner than in his glass office. As he waited, he noticed a woman across the table, mid-20s, simple jeans, white shirt, hair tied up, reading from a worn notebook. She looked out of place, but strangely comfortable. When Mama Nkechi brought his food, the woman looked up and smiled faintly. You don't strike me as the hibachi type. Michael smirked. And what type do I look like? The kind that orders online and complains when the delivery is late. He laughed softly. Maybe once, but I've learned to respect the people who make life move. She raised an eyebrow. That's rare for someone who drives a Lexus. Michael glanced at his car parked nearby, surprised she'd noticed. You're observant. I'm a journalist, she said simply. Observing is a job. He nodded. Michael, he said, extending a hand. She shook it. Zora. They talked for a while about Legos, about work, about how everyone pretended to be fine while surviving chaos. She didn't seem impressed by his name, which was refreshing. In fact, when he mentioned SwiftPath, she only said, Oh, I've heard of them. You run that. Like it was just another small detail, not the crown jewel of his empire. It felt grounding. When they finished eating, she paid for her food and stood. Nice meeting you, Mr. Logistics King. He smiled. Next time I'll pay. Next time, she teased. Yeah, I'm hoping there'll be one. She shrugged, smiling faintly. We'll see. And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint smell of coconut oil and rain. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed in his penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling. He'd met dozens of people, businesswomen, investors, influencers, but no one had spoken to him like Zara did, without fear, without flattery. It was like she saw the man before the money. He wanted to see her again. The next evening, he returned to the buka. She wasn't there. He came again the next day. Nothing. On the fourth day, he found her, scribbling in her notebook like time didn't exist. He didn't hide his smile. You're a hard woman to find. She looked up, amused. You've been looking for me? I've been craving a bacha. She laughed. Sure, you have. That became the start of something he hadn't felt in years, simplicity. Zara wasn't flashy. She didn't wear makeup or post everything online. She had dreams. To start her own independent media platform focused on real stories. But no rich sponsors, no investors. Michael offered to help once, and she'd said, No, thank you. I want to build it myself. If you give me wings, I'll never know if I could have flown. That answer stayed in his head for days. Months passed. Their meetings became frequent, unplanned yet inevitable. Sometimes, she'd bring him groundnuts while he waited in traffic. Sometimes, he'd bring her coffee during her late editing shifts. For the first time, Michael started smiling without realizing it. One night, after a long day, they sat in his car watching the city lights from 3rd Mainland Bridge. You know, Zara said softly, people write stories about men like you, the ones who rise from the ashes. Michael chuckled. You sound like a journalist again. I am, she said, but this story is different. You didn't just rise. You burned everything that tried to bury you. He turned to her, eyes soft. You talk like you've been buried too. She smiled faintly. Maybe, but I'm still digging my way out. He looked at her for a long moment. Then maybe we'll find daylight together. She didn't answer, but her hand found his, and that was enough. Life became a quiet balance after that. Zara didn't want to live off his world. She built her own. Her small online magazine, Street Voices, started gaining traction for its raw, fearless coverage of urban struggles. Transport workers, single mothers, market traders. Michael supported silently, sending her anonymous tips and connecting her with people who could help, but she never asked for credit. Meanwhile, Novago continued to expand. Investors poured in, competitors tried and failed to catch up, and Michael's influence spread far beyond logistics. He started getting invitations to speak at conferences. Young entrepreneurs called him Odegwu. He smiled through it all, but only one person saw the exhaustion behind the success. Zara. One night, after a particularly intense week of meetings, Michael came home late. Zara was waiting on the balcony, wearing one of his shirts, sipping tea. "You work too hard," she said softly. He smiled weakly. "Comes with a throne." She walked up to him, took the files from his hands, and set them aside. "You're allowed to rest, you know." He looked at her, really looked at her, the calm in her eyes, the ease in her presence. "You make it sound easy." "It is," she said. "You just forgot how." For a moment, they stood in silence, the city lights flickering below. Then Michael whispered, "I used to think love was weakness." Zara tilted her head. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I think it's the only thing that kept me human." She reached up, touched his face gently, and kissed him. Slow, soft, real. That night, he slept like a man who finally stopped running. Months later, headlines shifted. Zara's street voices went viral after an expose on government corruption. Her courage earned her national recognition and made her enemies. When anonymous threats began arriving, Michael doubled her security without her asking. But instead of fear, Zara laughed. If they're threatened, it means we're finally being heard. Michael admired her even more. She reminded him of who he once was, stubborn, brave, unbreakable. They became partners in life and in purpose. She gave him balance. He gave her protection. And slowly, without him even noticing, the man who had once been broken became whole again. One evening, Gideon visited them. He was older now, slower, but his mind still sharp. "You've done well, Michael," he said as they sat together on the balcony. "You built an empire and found peace. That's the rarest wealth of all." Michael smiled. "You made it possible." Gideon shook his head. "No, you made it inevitable. You were always a king, the world just needed time to see it." He turned to Zara, smiling. "And you, young lady, make sure he never forgets he's human." Zara laughed. "That's the only part of my plan to keep humble." They all laughed. Later that night, as Gideon's car drove away, Michael stood beside Zara, looking at the stars. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't live there anymore." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good, because I like where we are." He smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "So do I?" And as the night deepened, the hum of the city carried softly around them. No longer a noise, but a song. A song of survival. A song of redemption. A song of a man who was broken, betrayed, and reborn into his own legend. The morning light hit differently these days. Michael stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his new office. The city spread beneath him like a promise finally kept. From this height, the traffic below looked like veins of red and silver light, restless, alive, and endlessly moving forward. Just like him. The logo of his company, Crown Tech, shone proudly on the building's exterior glass. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was his resurrection. He sipped his coffee slowly, the bitter taste oddly satisfying. It reminded him of the nights he'd gone without food, sitting in that cramped one-room apartment with nothing but ideas, a broken laptop, and anger. Now, those same ideas had turned into contracts, partnerships, and investors who couldn't stop calling his phone. The world had changed, or maybe he had. Zara walked in quietly, a tablet in her hand. "Morning, boss," she said, smiling. "You've got a full day. CNBC interview at noon, then the Lagos Business Expo dinner at 7 p.m. CNBC, huh?" Michael murmured, still staring out the window. "Who would have thought?" Zara grinned. "The guy who refused to give up. That's who." He turned and smiled faintly. There was something about her, calm, efficient, loyal. But he never allowed himself to read too much into it. Not yet. Life had taught him that emotions could be expensive, "Give me the brief for the interview," he said, walking toward his desk. "And Zara, clear the next hour. I want quiet." "Yes, sir," she said, before leaving the room. When the door closed, Michael sank into his chair, exhaling deeply. His hands brushed against the wooden desk. Sleek, polished, custom-made. It wasn't about luxury. It was about proof. Proof that he had made it out alive. He opened his laptop. Dozens of unread messages filled the screen. Congratulations, partnership offers, brand invitations. His name was trending online again, only this time not for failure, but for his story. The man who turned heartbreak into an empire. The headlines were everywhere. He chuckled under his breath. "Now, they want to tell the story," he muttered. "Now they care." His phone buzzed. A notification popped up, a new follower request. The name made his chest tighten for a second. Linda J. Adebayo. He froze. She'd found him, but he didn't open the request. Not yet. He turned off the phone screen and leaned back, letting the silence wash over him. It wasn't time, not yet. The storm from the past was still brewing, and he would meet it on his own terms. At noon, the studio lights felt warm against his face. Cameras rolled. The interviewer, a tall man with a polished accent, smiled professionally. "Michael Adebayo, or should I say, the King Reborn," the interviewer began. "Your story has inspired millions online. Tell us, what sparked this transformation?" Michael smiled faintly, pausing just long enough for the silence to carry weight. "Pain," he said simply, "and the realization that no one's coming to save you." The interviewer nodded. "So, what would you say to people going through betrayal, failure, or loss, the kind you experienced?" Michael's eyes darkened slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "Don't run from it. Let it burn you. Let it break you. Because when you rebuild yourself, no one can take that version away from you again." The studio went quiet for a beat. Even the cameraman seemed frozen. Later that night, at the Lagos Business Expo, Michael arrived in a fitted black tuxedo. The air shimmered with wealth and power. Businessmen, politicians, influencers, all pretending to be equals. But tonight, Michael didn't need to pretend. He was one of them. No, he was above most of them. Zara stood by his side, her long emerald gown catching the light as she whispered updates into his ear. "Everyone wants a piece of you tonight," she said quietly. "You've got the investors from Dubai and the minister's aide requesting a private chat." Michael smirked. Let them wait. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a man who knew his worth. Cameras flashed. People shook his hand, and every smile carried the same unspoken question. How did he do it? He could almost feel their curiosity burning against his back. Halfway through the night, he stood by the bar, nursing a glass of water, while Zara mingled nearby. That's when a familiar voice behind him froze his spine. "Well, if it isn't Michael Adebayo, the man of the hour." He turned slowly. Daniel, his once best friend, the man who had stood beside him on his wedding day, and later, beside his wife in betrayal. Daniel looked older now, but still carried the arrogant smirk that used to make Michael's blood boil. "Heard a lot about you, man. You've done well for yourself." Michael's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "That's one way to put it." Daniel chuckled and leaned closer. "You know, Linda and I watched your CNBC interview today. She said you've changed." Michael's fingers brushed the glass stem lightly. "People do." Daniel smirked. "You should see her now. She's not doing so well. Guess karma's a thing, huh?" Michael's eyes didn't waver. "Karma's efficient when you don't chase it," he said quietly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, some of us have things to build." He walked away before Daniel could reply. But inside, his heart pounded like war drums. The past had finally entered the room. Back in his car later that night, Michael sat in silence. The city lights blurred through the windshield as rain started to fall. Zara sat beside him, watching him quietly. "You okay?" she asked softly. He turned to her, and for the first time in a long while, he let the mask slip. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice betrayed him. "Just ghosts." Zara didn't push. She simply placed her hand over his, steady, grounding, human. He stared at their hands, then at her face. The warmth, the quiet strength. Something inside him softened. For the first time since his fall, he felt something close to peace. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked. "For seeing me when no one else did." Zara smiled gently. "Then keep being worth seeing." That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michael finally understood something. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about freeing himself. But freedom didn't mean forgetting. Tomorrow, the world would know just how far he'd come and just how untouchable he'd become, because the man they ignored was now the man they couldn't stop watching. The city that once mocked his name now moved to his rhythm. Everywhere Michael went, whispers followed, admiration, envy, curiosity. But he walked through them all with quiet composure, the same man who had learned that silence could be louder than applause. It had been 3 months since the Lagos Business Expo. 3 months since Daniel's smirk had resurfaced like a bad memory. Since then, Michael hadn't needed revenge. The universe seemed to be handling that part with precision. One Monday morning, Zara placed a tablet on Michael's desk. "You might want to see this," she said quietly. Michael frowned and tapped the screen. It was an online article from a financial blog. Adebayo Holdings faces bankruptcy allegations. He blinked slowly, his face unreadable. Adebayo Holdings, Daniel's company. "Looks like someone overplayed his hand," Zara murmured. "Their investors are pulling out. Mismanagement, fraud investigation, it's everywhere." Michael leaned back, expression calm but eyes sharp. "And Linda?" Zara hesitated. "Apparently she's still with him. But it's bad. They're both trending, not for the right reasons." A small silence filled the room. Then Michael said quietly, "Let them taste it." He didn't laugh, didn't gloat, didn't even smile. His satisfaction was deeper, quieter, the kind that came from knowing he no longer needed to strike back. His very success was doing it for him. A few weeks later, while Michael was reviewing new partnership documents, his phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in years. He froze. "Linda." For a brief second, the air seemed to thicken. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity, that old ache of unfinished wounds, made his thumb slide across the screen. "Hello." His voice was calm, controlled. There was silence, then a shaky breath. "Michael, it's me." He didn't reply. I know you probably hate me," she continued, her voice trembling. "But things have been bad. Daniel, he's been arrested. They froze our accounts. I have nowhere to go. Please, I just need someone to talk to." He closed his eyes, resting his head against the chair. For a moment, memories flickered, her laughter, her betrayal, her walking away with the man who'd called him useless. Then he opened his eyes again. The man who once begged for her love was gone. "Linda," he said softly, "you made your choice." I know, but I was wrong, Michael. You have no idea how much I regret it." He exhaled slowly. "Regret doesn't erase betrayal. Goodbye." "Michael, please." He ended the call. The silence afterward was deafening, heavy but freeing. He stared at the phone, then placed it face down on the desk and went back to work. Zara watched him from the doorway, having seen everything. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I'm better than I've ever been," he replied. And this time, he meant it. Success had a strange way of reshaping relationships. Suddenly, cousins who had mocked him were forwarding business proposals. Aunties who once said, "You're not serious with your life," were calling him my son, our pride. Even his father, who had called him a failure, reached out through a family friend. "Your father says he's proud of you," the man said, smiling nervously. "He wants to meet." Michael's face remained calm. "Tell him I appreciate the message," he said quietly. "But I'm busy building what he never believed I could." The man shifted awkwardly. "He's getting old, you know. Maybe he just wants peace." Michael's jaw tightened. Peace comes after truth. And none of them ever stood by me when it mattered. The messenger nodded slowly. "So you won't see him?" Michael looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like constellations. "No," he said finally. "Not now. Maybe not ever." It wasn't anger anymore, just distance, like standing on opposite ends of time. A few days later, news broke like wildfire. Daniel Adebayo sentenced for financial fraud. Assets seized, properties confiscated. Videos surfaced online. Reporters outside the courthouse, Daniel in handcuffs, Linda hiding her face from cameras. The same social media that once celebrated them now turned on them like wolves. That's karma. Serve them right. Meanwhile, Michael Adebayo is hosting tech conferences abroad. Michael watched it unfold quietly from his penthouse living room. Zara sat beside him, scrolling through the news on her phone. "You know," she said softly, "most people would call this justice." He smiled faintly. Justice doesn't always come from punishment. Sometimes it's just peace they can't touch. Zara glanced at him, admiring how calm he'd become. The man who once burned with vengeance now radiated control. Power, not spite. One evening, Michael was leaving his office when he saw a woman waiting outside the building. She wore a faded dress, her hair disheveled, eyes hollow. "Linda." She took a shaky step forward. "Michael, please, just a minute." Security moved instinctively, but Michael raised a hand. "It's okay." She looked up at him, tears already filling her eyes. "You have every right to hate me. I destroyed everything we had. But I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." He looked at her for a long moment, the city noise fading into a distant hum. Then he nodded once. "I forgave you a long time ago," he said quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean access." Her lips trembled. "Can we at least talk?" "No," he said simply. "That chapter ended the day you walked away. I've written a new one." And with that, he turned and entered his car. As the doors closed, Linda collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing. But Michael didn't look back, because kings don't return to ruins. That night, he sat on his balcony, overlooking the city that had witnessed his humiliation and his rebirth. Zara joined him, 2 mugs of tea in her hands. "She came today," he said quietly. "I know," Zara replied. "You did the right thing." He nodded, exhaling deeply. "Funny how life works. I used to think revenge was everything. And now," she asked, "now I know peace is louder." Zara smiled softly. "You've earned it, Michael." He looked at her, and for the first time, really saw her, the woman who'd walked beside him through the ashes, never asking for anything in return. He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's time I start building something else." "Like what?" she teased. He looked out at the skyline, his voice calm but sure. "A legacy." The city had always been loud. Honking cars, shouting vendors, restless engines of ambition. But this morning, it was Michael's name echoing through the noise. Crown Tech CEO signs $20 million international deal. Michael Adebayo named African Tech Personality of the Year. From heartbreak to headlines, the man who turned betrayal into brilliance. Every headline, every news flash, every camera click, all of it was a mirror reflecting how far he had come. Once, he was a man his wife mocked, his best friend pitted, his family dismissed. Now, he was a man no one could ignore. The event was held at the Eco Convention Center, a gathering of the continent's biggest innovators, investors, and power brokers. Michael's company, Crown Tech, was the centerpiece of the evening. Its new partnership with a Dubai-based conglomerate had set off a ripple across Africa's tech scene. As he stepped out of his car, flashes from cameras cut through the night. Journalists shouted his name, microphones thrust forward. But Michael moved with quiet dignity, confident, composed, every inch the man who had rebuilt himself from dust. Zara walked beside him in a flowing navy gown, simple but elegant. The crowd's eyes followed them, not just because they looked perfect together, but because their aura carried a story of pain, of rebirth, of triumph. "Mr. Adebayo, how does it feel to be called the king of comebacks?" one reporter asked. Michael paused briefly, his eyes glinting. "It feels," he said with a small smile, "like pain finally paid its debt." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. But behind that calm response lay years of nights spent fighting invisible battles, bleeding in silence, and rebuilding one stubborn day at a time. Later that night, As speeches filled the hall, Michael sat at his reserve table. He wasn't thinking of money or fame. His mind drifted back to the rainy night he'd stood outside his apartment, holding divorce papers in one hand and his broken heart in the other. He'd once believed that night ended his story. Now he knew it had only been chapter 1. When his name was called for the final award, the entire hall stood and applauded. Zara placed her hand on his arm, eyes shining with pride. "Go," she whispered, smiling. "This is yours." He walked onto the stage. The lights hit him full in the face, bright, hot, almost blinding. But he didn't flinch. He took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, politicians, CEOs, former critics, and spoke with quiet strength. "A few years ago, I was told I wasn't enough. I was told I couldn't succeed without certain people. I believed them until I decided to bet on myself instead. Pain can destroy you or it can rebuild you. I chose to rebuild." The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. So to anyone listening who's been betrayed, forgotten, or doubted, remember this. What they call your end might just be your beginning. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, emotional. Even the event host had tears in her eyes. After the event, Michael and Zara stood on the balcony of the hotel suite, overlooking the ocean. The night air was soft and cool. The city lights shimmered like stars trying to compete with him. Zara turned toward him, her hair swaying gently in the wind. "You did it," she said softly. He smiled. "We did it." She laughed. "I just managed emails." He shook his head. "You did more than that. You kept me human when I wanted to become a ghost." She looked at him then, really looked, the way one does when they realize they're standing next to someone who changed their destiny. "Michael," she whispered, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone through all that pain?" He took a deep breath. "Yeah," he said. "I'd probably still be someone else's version of me. Not mine." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then I'm glad life broke you." He laughed, shaking his head. "You have a weird way of saying sweet things." And then, under the glow of the moon and the hum of the city below, he kissed her, slow, certain, and grateful. It wasn't the fiery desperation of lost love. It was a quiet warmth of found peace. Time moved quickly after that. Crown Tech expanded into 7 countries. Michael became a keynote speaker at global conferences, his face appearing on magazine covers. But he never let the fame consume him. He still took early morning walks through Lecky's quiet streets, still stopped to buy roasted corn from the same old woman who never recognized him. And Zara, now Mrs. Adebayo, remained the heart behind every strategy, the calm in every storm. Together, they built not just an empire, but a home. 2 years later, as Michael held his newborn daughter in his arms, something inside him settled, that final piece of peace he didn't know he'd been missing. Zara sat beside him in the hospital room, exhausted but smiling. "She looks like you," she whispered. He grinned. "Then she's already perfect." The baby stirred softly, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb. Michael felt tears blur his vision. For all the nights he'd cried alone, for all the times he'd been told he wasn't enough, this moment rewrote it all. He leaned down and whispered to his daughter, "You're my new beginning." Months later, Michael visited his father's old house. He didn't go out of guilt or pride, just closure. The old man looked frail, sitting on the porch. When he saw Michael, his eyes widened. "My son." Michael smiled faintly. "It's been a while." The silence between them said everything. The regret, the unspoken apologies, the years wasted on doubt. Finally, his father sighed. "I was wrong about you." Michael nodded. "Maybe you just couldn't see the man I was becoming." His father's eyes filled with tears. "Can you forgive me?" Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "I already did." It wasn't reconciliation for validation. It was peace for his own heart. That evening, back at his home office, Michael stood by the window again, the same pose from years ago, but a different man entirely. Below, his daughter's laughter echoed to the house as Zara chased her around the living room. He smiled. On his desk sat an award plaque that read, "Inspiration of the Decade, Michael Adebayo." He didn't see it as a trophy. To him, it was a mirror reflecting everything he'd learned. Betrayal doesn't end you. Failure doesn't define you. It all forges you if you let it. He picked up his phone and opened a draft of his upcoming TED Talk speech. At the top of the page, he typed one final line. "They broke me to build me." He paused, then added beneath it, "And that's how a man becomes a king." Years later, his daughter would grow up hearing the story of how her father rose from betrayal to greatness. Not as a fairy tale, but as truth. And every time she'd ask, "Daddy, how did you become a king?" Michael would smile, pull her close, and say, "Because when the world buried me, I decided to grow roots instead." The story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebirth, about what happens when pain meets purpose. And in that truth, the man they once mocked stood forever tall, the king they built by mistake. The story comes to an end, but you should carry the great lesson along with you. Sometimes life breaks you, not to destroy you, but to rebuild you into someone unshakable. Michael's story isn't just about revenge. It's about resilience, about standing up when the world calls you worthless, and proving that the ones who left you behind were never meant to stay. When people walk out, don't chase them. When doors close, don't beg for them to open. Use the silence. Use the pain. Because one day, the same people who doubted you will watch your rise in disbelief. Remember this. True kings aren't crowned by luck. They're forged by fire. So rise. No matter who left. No matter how many times you fell. Your time is coming. Just like Michael's.